All right, guys, this is your lesson on volcanoes. So this is your bell ringer for that, just kind of to get your brain in the right spot. So the first question says, where can volcanoes occur? We talked about this a little bit in class already. And number two, are all volcanoes the same? Number three, what happens when volcanoes erupt? And number four, what's the difference between lava and magma? So go ahead, do me a favor, pause this and write these in your notes or answer them on a Google Doc or just answer them in your head to kind of get your head in the right spot so you'll be ready to learn a little bit more in this lesson. All right, now that you've had a chance to answer those questions. So volcanoes can occur in two kinds of places. We've already talked about plate boundaries. We talked about that in class. Y'all should know that one. And then the second one. Some of you might know this and some of you might not, and that's okay. Volcanoes can occur at places called hotspots, and we'll talk about what those are in class today. So there are two places where we're more likely to get volcanoes. All right, and number two, are all volcanoes the same? Absolutely not. There's all kinds of different kinds of volcanoes, different shapes, different sizes. They erupt differently. So there's all kinds of different kinds of volcanoes. All right. And number three, what happens when a volcano erupts? All right. So there are some basic things that are going to happen when a volcano erupts. We're going to have magma coming up through the crust, and we call it lava once it reaches the surface. So once that reaches the surface, you'll have some kind of lava flow on the surface of Earth. Some of these are in what we call lava fields and not truly a volcano, but we still consider that volcanic activity because that lava is reaching the surface and it is spreading across the surface of Earth. Okay. Some of them can be a lot more severe. Some of them can have huge violent eruptions that are spewing lava for miles. In those cases, you'll have actually a volcanic storm. So all that ash and dust and rock and everything that is tossed into the atmosphere, into the air around the volcano, actually causes some lightning storms. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about what happens when a volcano erupts a little bit later on. All right, now what's the difference between lava and magma? We talked about this a little bit when we talked about Earth's layers. So magma is all that molten gooey rock that is underneath the surface of Earth. And we call it magma as long as it is underneath the crust. Once it reaches the surface, once we can see it without digging down into Earth, we call it lava. So it is truly the exact same substance. We just have a different name for it based on where it's at. Okay? All right, so we are talking. This is your title for your notes. So if you want to write the title for your notes, you can put that on there. We are going to talk about where and why we have volcanoes, what happens when they erupt, and I've got some cool things to show you at the end. So some neat videos. All right. So we said this in the bell ringer. Volcanoes occur at plate boundaries and hotspots. Hotspots are hotspots in the mantle, and they cause a thin spot in Earth's crust. And when the pressure of the mantle gets too great, the hotspot will rupture and you'll have a volcanic eruption. So that can cause a couple different things. The hotspots are not moving with the plate. All right. So that hotspot stays. It keeps making thin spots in the crust. It makes volcanoes. It makes them erupt. And we get chains of volcanoes or chains of islands formed by those volcanoes, much like the Hawaiian Islands. So the Hawaiian Islands are not near a plate boundary. They were caused by a hotspot. Okay, so there are plenty of volcanoes in Hawaii. Those were caused by hotspots. Most of them are still at least mildly active today. A lot of them are not super violent. We don't have a whole ton of issues with volcanoes being very violent in Hawaii right now. But most of the volcanoes in Hawaii are considered active still. All right, now volcanoes that occur on the plate boundaries aren't going to move and shift around. So we're not going to get chains of those volcanoes like we do in the middle of the plates. We might still have a line of volcanoes, like when we talk about those mountain ranges, we'll have a line of those. So it's a different way for it to form. They might look similar on the surface, but they are formed in a very different way. So the volcanoes that occur on the plate boundary are going to stay with that boundary line. So if that plate moves, they're going to move with it. But the hotspot doesn't move with the plate because it is actually part of the mantle and not part of the plate. Okay? Now, when a volcano erupts, we said this a little bit already, it can be calm or it can be violent. Calm eruptions simply mean that lava is flowing out of the volcano, so it's coming out of one of the vents of the volcano. They can cause lava rock and ash to be thrown from the volcano into the atmosphere and cause huge amounts of air pollution around that area, so it would be really hard to breathe. It would be dark. It might stay that way for a couple days. So it can be very violent. There can be a lot of things that are damaged because of the volcano, and you don't have to be very close to a volcano when it erupts for you to experience a whole ton of damage from it. And we'll talk a little bit later on about what that looks like and what that looks like for different cities, okay, or for a different kind of volcanic eruption. All right. So sometimes earthquakes can cause that volcano to erupt because if those plates are moving and things are shifting, then it can release some of that pressure out of the volcano. So an earthquake can cause a volcanic eruption. And sometimes the eruption is so strong and so much pressure has built up that it will cause an earthquake as well. All right. Now, both earthquakes and volcanoes are where the extra pressure is released by those tectonic plates. So they can have really similar qualities. All right. Now, we're going to talk about what a volcano looks like. All right, so most of you know that a volcano looks like a mountain, or it's shaped kind of like a mountain. Some of them are really sharp and pointy. Some of them are really flat. Some of them are just kind of rounded like big hills. But for the most part, they have the same parts. Okay, the cone is formed over time by cooling lava that hardens in layers. So that would be the mountain shape or the cone shape to that volcano. The vents are gaps that allow magma to flow out. So they're allowing the mantle to reach the surface of Earth and cool down. Magma is that molten rock that is below Earth's surface. And once it reaches the surface of Earth, we call it lava. All right. So it is truly, again, it's the exact same stuff. It just has a different name based on where it's at. Magma is below Earth's surface. So magma is part of the mantle. And lava has reached the surface of Earth. So lava is out in the light. All right. So this is what that would look like if we're talking about a diagram. We will use this diagram a little bit later on. We'll have a couple different diagrams that look a little bit different. So the cone is this mountain-shaped part, and I kind of drew the layers in there so you can see where the layers formed of layers of lava cooling over the top of it. The vents are the gaps that allow that magma to flow out of the volcano, and we do call it lava once it reaches the surface, and while it's still underground, while it's not out in the light, we call it magma. So magma is part of that mantle and lava is out in the light. Okay. So now that we know a little bit about volcanoes, what they look like, all kinds of stuff, we are going to talk about one specific eruption because this one's fairly famous. So I've got an animation of what it looked like. Okay. All right, so this video is actually a video of a specific volcanic eruption. This is from Pompeii. Some of you have probably heard of Pompeii before. It is an ancient city in Italy, so it's a Roman city. All right, I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit so hopefully you can see better. All right, so this is an animation of it. We didn't have video cameras back then. This is 79 AD, so 79 years before we started counting time the way we count it now. So at 2021, plus 79 AD. Okay, so this was a long time ago. It was a couple thousand years ago. So we are looking at an animation of this. We know based on a lot of geologic studies and a lot of archaeological studies what happened. So this is the best way we can show what we think happened. So I'm going to play this for you, and I want you to listen to what's happening at first because you'll be able to hear things before anything actually really shows up on your screen. Okay? Right, the music is not what I'm talking about listening to. There's some other stuff. The music will go away in just a second. All right, so 8 o'clock in the morning, so around the time that you would wake up and start school. It looks like a normal day. They are near the volcano, but they are fairly far away. So this is roughly like, 60, 80 miles away from the city that we're sitting in. It's just a large volcano, so it's very easy for them to see. So like from us to all the way to south of Colombia, that's about how far away they are from the volcano. All right, so they had an earthquake. They could see a little bit of smoke coming out of the volcano. But again, that probably happened on a fairly regular basis for them. Kind of like when we get a nasty thunderstorm. Sometimes it's not great, but it is something that happens fairly often. We're not super worried when we get a nasty thunderstorm. All right, so this is around lunchtime that same day. So it hasn't been a super long time. So they've gone from 8 o'clock in the morning to lunchtime. So again, they're seeing some smoke come out of the volcano. They don't really know what's coming. They don't really see what's coming. Um, I mean, this probably happens every couple of years. They might have a small eruption, kind of like this. Um, Again, they're having another earthquake. That's something they probably experienced before. Not really something that's super scary for them yet. Probably not fun. It would be about like us having tornadoes or hurricanes. So they're not worried about trying to get out of there yet. They know that there's been a couple of earthquakes and it looks like a small eruption. This is probably something that happens not fairly often. Talk about the stuff falling from the sky. So that's probably one of those times where they were probably starting to worry a little bit. Right now, this is 3 o'clock. So this is around the time that we would get out of school. All right, this is probably when people started to worry, like legitimately worry. But I do want to point out, even in this time where they're experiencing this and they're thinking, "Oh no, this is not great," this is ancient Rome. Most of these people that were here didn't have another place to go. Even if they knew to get out in time or knew a way to get out, they probably didn't have anywhere to go. The very rich people probably knew that they had another city that they could leave to. They had a carriage to be able to put some stuff in to be able to survive. But for the most part, this city was fairly far away from other cities nearby. So they're not able to just pick up and leave and walk somewhere else. They don't have cars. They can't drive really fast. They're going to have to go on foot everywhere they go. So most of the people that were here during this eruption were pretty much stuck because they didn't have anywhere else to go. Okay. They didn't have cars. They didn't have carriages. They didn't have horses. That was something that just the very rich people had. So there are probably some people that were able to get away or at least mostly get away from this city, but there's a lot of people that couldn't. They just didn't have the resources to be able to leave. They didn't have the knowledge to know where to go or who was able to help them. So think about that more because I have questions every single year. Why didn't they just leave? Why couldn't they just walk away? Well, one, we can't really predict volcanic eruptions and we can't tell you how bad they're going to be. We don't know how bad that's going to be until we're in the middle of it and it's already awful. Okay. So if somebody had started at 8 o'clock in the morning when they first saw that tiny little bit of smoke coming out of the volcano, they might have been able to get far enough away that they wouldn't have been hurt by the volcanic eruption. But at that point in time, they didn't realize that it was going to be a big eruption. It was small. It was something that probably happened, I don't know, once or twice, 2-3 times a year. So that's not something they were worried about. And even still, they didn't really have anywhere to go. You couldn't just like go hang out with a friend because all the people that you knew were in that same city because you didn't have the opportunities to travel and go and see other cities. So you didn't really have the option to leave where you were. You couldn't just call somebody or send an email or, hey, I know how to do this. Can I get a job in a different city and find a different place to live? It wasn't really a reality for them. So trying to pick up and leave like this, especially just your everyday average person, that wasn't really an option for them. Okay. All right. So we were at 3 o'clock. Now it's 5 o'clock. We're getting shorter time periods. So we're starting to see more changes really, really quickly. And this is probably the point where people were really legitimately scared and just kind of hiding wherever they were. All right, now we talked about this when we talked about the lesson. We talked about how all this ash and dust is thrown into the air, and you can see the lightning strikes. That is not from a thunderstorm. That is from the volcanic eruption itself, okay? Now, pieces of lava are being thrown into the city, so that's why there are fires starting. Some of the fires were probably started by the lightning, and of course there are giant rocks being thrown, and this is a really, really violent eruption. So keep that in mind. This is not just like an everyday average volcanic eruption, okay? All right, so we went from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Now it's 8 o'clock. So we're still getting those really short time periods. We're not talking about a half a day or a whole day. All right, so now at 8 o'clock in the evening, the sun is not set yet, but it's close to setting. Okay, so we can see where the sun is almost set over here. This has been one day. This has been a full 12 hours since this volcanic eruption started. Only 12 hours. Now, granted, this is a very violent volcanic eruption, but I would wager to say that by now, even if there are people in the city, they're not alive or they're very close to passing away already. So this volcanic eruption, even though that volcano was 60, 100 miles away from them, it didn't matter because it's such a such a violent volcanic eruption. So when we talk about volcanoes, we're not just talking about, oh, there's a little bit of lava coming out or anything like that. Sometimes they can be earth shattering. And I don't mean that to be funny, but they're literally cracking the earth's crust. They're throwing all kinds of stuff all over the place. They're letting all of this tension out. And I mean, when you live close to one, even though we don't think about Colombia being close to us, it's 60 miles away. It takes at least an hour for us to drive from here to Colombia. That volcano, that's close enough to that volcano for it to do this kind of damage. Okay. All right, so now we're just after midnight on that same day. So we went from 8 o'clock until midnight. Well, 1 o'clock in the morning, so an hour after midnight. And I do want you to think about this. The sun is not out right now. It is after midnight. It is 1 o'clock in the morning. That is not sunlight that we're seeing. That light is from the lava that's flowing out of the volcano and probably some of the fires that have been set near the volcano. Okay? So this is not sunlight we're seeing. We're starting to see some of the volcano coming apart. So we are getting what we would consider like a landslide. So there's a bunch of stuff coming down the side of that mountain now. All right? And you can hear all this stuff. Right now we're at 6 o'clock in the morning, so almost 24 hours later. It's about 22 hours after we initially started. Now, these buildings, most of them are just completely flattened. What is left of them is, I mean, it's not much. It's all rubble. It's all been leveled close to the ground. Okay. Now, we talked about how there was a landslide on the volcano. We can't see anything anymore. All that dust and rock and junk has been thrown up into the air. So when we look out to that skyline, we can't see anything. But if you listen, you can hear it. It's starting to get to us finally. So it's starting to get to the city of Pompeii. All right. Now, we talked about this. The volcano is almost as far away as Colombia is from us. So this had to come a very long distance. So it took a long time to get here. All right. And now it makes it almost all the way to the city. It's getting to us. You can kind of see that it slows down once it gets higher into the sky because it's smaller pieces being thrown up. But when it finally does make it to the city, it does cover the whole city. So Pompeii was destroyed by this Mount Vesuvius. All right. And they are going to show us the after effects. So remember, this is 24 hours later. This is what it looks like. And that's not snow on the ground. That's ash from the volcano. And I do want you to look back here and see how short this is now. We talked about that mountain being like this big when we first started. All that top piece right here, that's what was part of the eruption. That was part of that landslide. So when we talk about the damage caused by a volcano, it can be really small, but it can be absolutely awful. Okay. Now, it says by the end of the 25th of August, the landscape around Mount Vesuvius had been changed forever. Vesuvius was now a crater instead of a mountain, and the river and the port were gone. So the river was completely wiped off the map. It was filled in with all that ash and dust and rock from the volcanic eruption, and the port that led into that city was gone as well. So all that had been filled in with that rock and ash and dust, so it completely changed the landscape, not just the city itself. So the volcano is no longer a mountain, it's just a crater. So there is no mountain in that area anymore. It has been blown out into just a crater, and the river is gone, and now the port that powered that city is now gone as well. Okay, so Mount Vesuvius has not erupted since then. It is considered a dormant volcano. It is now quiet. There's no other volcanic activity in that area. And they actually let tourists walk all around the top of that crater, and you can climb down into the crater and kind of hike around in there and see what's left of Mount Vesuvius. All right. All right. I'm going to take this video down. All right. So this is a second video. And we talked about how people were probably trapped in the city. But I do want to show you this because this is something that kind of connects us with social studies. It kind of connects the history that we talk about when we talk about these ancient Roman cities. So this is from a museum in the city of Pompeii. And this is just things that they were able to find in the ruins, in the rubble of that city. Okay. Now, when these people were covered with ash and rock, they were preserved. So they left behind gaps in the ground. So they left behind holes. And so we went in and we filled those with plaster once we realized what they were. And we're able to actually see what was going on. They showed some people were trying to flee. Some people had stuff on their shoulders, like bags on their shoulders. Some people were probably injured or fell and just didn't have a way out or couldn't get out because they were injured so badly. But we are able to see what some of this stuff was like, and we can kind of use that to think of clues about what the city was like or what they were trying to do at the time. And a lot of their pottery, a lot of their stuff that they used every day, that was preserved. This woman's clothing was preserved on her body. So we're able to learn a lot about this city and about the ancient life that they lived based on what we were able to find after Pompeii. Okay, so we were able to see in the ruins. And you can see on this one that the bones are actually preserved inside of there, and even the teeth are preserved really well. So this is a way for archaeologists to look back and say, we can find proof of what their life was like. We can get a little bit more information and learn about how they lived their lives and what their life would have been like. Okay. And this person, they showed this person, it looks like they were praying. They were probably praying and saying, asking for help or at least guidance or anything like that. This is somebody's pet. So we are able to see that there is a collar on the dog. So this isn't just, we found a dog. It's we know that they had pets, they had animals that they domesticated and took care of. So we were able to learn a lot about ancient Rome by looking at the ruins from Pompeii. Okay. All right. Now, this next video is a little bit brighter and lighter. We are able to see an underwater volcano erupting. So you saw some of those on those plate boundaries assignments that you had. So this is what's happening. You can see the lava when it comes out into the water. It cools really quickly. It's probably heating up the water. That's what some of those bubbles are. Some of that is gas coming out of the volcano. So we're able to see some really interesting
magmatic gas.
Yeah.
And the magmatic gas, we presume, is mostly water. And when the water is under the magma, it's at magmatic temperatures, thousands of degrees. And when it's suddenly cooled by coming in contact with seawater, the bubble bursts. So what excites me the most about this volcanic eruption is that we have that on.
All right. So I just wanted you to be able to see all this. He's talking about the same stuff that I am. I didn't want to confuse y'all. But a lot of that is water vapor because it's boiling. It's getting really hot when it hits the volcano. But again, that water is cool. So it is cooling the rock a lot quicker than it would just cool in the air. So it is kind of breaking off and forming into rocks. And we're seeing all that happen as the volcano erupts underwater. Okay. All right. All right, so this last video down here, I don't know what happened to it. It's not working. It says the link is gone. They removed the video. But there are all kinds of videos of people testing out different things and tossing different things into the lava in volcanoes or in lava fields. So that is something, if you're interested in looking at it or just want to watch it because you think it would look neat, that is something you can look up on YouTube. It is fairly easy to find that kind of stuff. Okay. So we talked about volcanoes. We talked about the parts of those volcanoes, what it looks like. We talked about what a volcanic eruption can look like. Of course, we talked about a really, really bad one. But you'll have another assignment where you get to actually kind of play with a volcano and see how the different kinds of volcanoes erupt differently. All right. And that's it.